Morning at NTV. It's so humbling to still have you, those who are still joining these conversations from wherever you're watching from. I'm Andrew Chamagero Omontuwa. And so now, yesterday, the Minister of Education released a list of the Minister of Education and Sports released a list, and this was a list of regulations that will govern children and schools when they reopen. Now, to speak to us about the new rules and guidelines, we have Mr. Patrick Kaboyo, the National Secretary of the Federation of Non-State Education Institutions, and Mr. Mtesasira Kaganizi, the Secretary General of the Liberal Science Teachers Union in Uganda. Good morning, gentlemen. Good to have you here. Now, I'll start with Mr. Muganizi. With all this that you're seeing, does it make sense to you? Are these guidelines feasible? Are they workable on ground?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Presenter, and our viewers and listeners there. To put it clear, I'm Kaganizo Mtesasira, President General, Uganda Liberal Teachers Union. Now, I think what you are putting before us is very important and pertinent for us as teachers, because whatever goes in the ministry, and actually as schools reopen, we are actually the first contact persons in this exercise. So, the issues to open the schools, I think it is actually long overdue, because we are looking at alternatives. When the lockdown came in and the pandemic now advanced on us, it was necessary that the schools had to close, that the teachers had to go home. But what cost have we encountered as a nation, as a community, as a society? Now, of course, we are looking at a scenario whereby we are saying that without education, life can actually totally be different and can be disastrous to that effect. So, for us as teachers, as education providers, we are actually happy with government for the reopening.
Being happy, you're happy, but are these guidelines feasible from the practicing point of view?
They're extremely important, those guidelines, because first of all, we need to look at physical infrastructure in schools. But they are talking about gates, so that every school must have a gate. This is something which must have been there even a long time before the COVID-19 came in, because the security of our children is the concern of the teachers, is the concern of the parents, is the concern of the government, is the concern of every stakeholder in the schools.
That I don't dispute.
So that's one.
Mr. Muganizi, are they feasible? If you're saying that all schools must have gates so that you can be in position to track who entered and all that, a school in a beam is an open school, but it has to open because it has finalists. You, as the Secretary General of the Liberal Science Teachers Forum, is this feasible as a practicing teacher?
Yeah. Now, why I'm saying that one is that it should have been in place, not necessarily because there is COVID, but because for the security and safety of our children.
In the work that it's not there.
Now that it's not there,
feasible.
The challenge is now there are certificates of compliance which are being issued to schools. That means that the institutions, the schools which don't have those compliance, will not get the certificates of compliance to reopen. And what happens in that situation? It means the government and all other stakeholders must come in. We must look at the capability, the readiness of the schools, of different institutions to open and operate under these procedures. Now, another important question which we must put ourselves to is these procedures. Now, they cannot be fulfilled at the moment because the schools have not opened. The children are not going there. The teachers are not going there. The cooks are not there. So now the question is, those who can manage the basics open, are they able to observe those operating procedures when the schools are running?
It's the same question I was asking Mr. Mgans, but I'll get back to you later. Mr. Kaboyo, good to have you again. I think you should now be one of our panelists, because when it comes to education, I'm always having you here. Looking at all the guidelines, that the way they've been set out, are they feasible? And on the other bit of it, can you afford them as school owners?
Thank you, Andrew, and viewers. You know, when things change, you also have to follow the change. Of course, we know that COVID is here. Affordability is one story, but the most important aspect of this is readiness in terms of assuring our parents and also the learners that if schools open, because the monster we are trying to address here is COVID.
Yes.
If schools open and you are supposed to wear a mask, you wear that mask so that you avoid COVID. So to me, there are three fundamental principles we should look at. One, being positive and having a positive attitude.
As a nation.
As a nation. Two, compliance, that every Ugandan has to comply. Not that I want to comply to interest government or to see, to show parents that I have to comply. It is your responsibility. And the third one is communication and sensitization. We are already now communicating to the public. This is not just a mere show for us to come here and say these things. We expect that every director watching us in the countryside, including students, must know that this is the first level of sensitization, because issues we are talking about are not simple issues. Some of us have been trained by the Ministry of Health. Some of us have had first information that we should disseminate. And the information is primarily given to the public so that they do not remain in the other old fashion of saying, you see, there is this saying, you know, this is Uganda.
Oh, yes.
For us, we don't want that in our schools. And I want to assume that every director is ready. But I have also got calls mostly from up-country directors who are asking me about the money they expect from government,
yes,
to assist them in the reopening. And you know for sure that government put us to the road to UDB, which is quite a bumpy one and very hectic. And as directors, we shall be requesting government to shorten the journey to UDB so that when we discuss and talk about stimulus, if you want to stimulate something, for instance, you have your meal and you want to put pepper there, hot pepper, within no time, if you taste, you'll know that this food has pepper mix. So for schools to be stimulated to start, it means that a rapid fund has to be in place for them to
in his
start.
last address, His Excellency, the President of the country, Yoweri Museveni, made it much more clear. He said 20 billion was given to public schools.
No. 20 billion was given to teachers of private schools.
Of private schools.
Yes.
That's where I'm coming. Now, given that this money was given there, can't we use that fund to disseminate to the private schools up country and all that?
Well, unless you want teachers of private schools to roast you or storm this studio. I want to tell you that every teacher in the country, be it in the urban, city or rural, is warming up and gearing up for this money. But I also want to say that 20 billion to all the teachers we have in private schools is not so much money. But the models that would want to propose will be good enough to ensure that every teacher can access, maybe through borrowing, because you know this is a grant. And a grant is not a gift that you just take it and buy what you want, or you go and feast at Cafe Javas or those who are in up country. You should be able to plan ahead, and this money, therefore, through the leaders of the teachers themselves, has to be put to good use and not to be embezzled or misappropriated like it is the norm in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kawiyo, but you didn't answer my first question. Can you afford these new guidelines as school owners?
We might not afford all, but we can afford some. And I want to tell you that schools are managed by human beings. These are not guidelines that are going to be implemented by animals. And also, when we started, there has been this discussion of having a school gate. Come on.
From day one.
When we talk about a gate, we are not talking about steel and buying metal substance to come and make a gate. We are talking of how creative, for instance, if your school is in the village, can you provide poles and reeds and papyrus reeds and make sure that you have a gate that can open and close? That is already a barrier. If you have no fence including in peri-urban areas. It does no harm for you to look for material that is locally made and put a natural fence. That is enough. Barbed wire is not so much expensive. We have not said that if government is saying put a fence, you now go to look for money, to buy bricks, to buy this cement, labor. Not at all. You have to think out of the box.
We should be creative.
Yes, if the requirement is there, think about a creative model that you can use to make sure that it is put. If it is so perturbing and hard to fix, dialogue with authorities, because authorities know that schools have opened and students must be in
school,
yes, but also to call upon the directors that we shouldn't be thinking the old style. This is a new thinking, and things have changed. Unless you want to remain there, you should have a positive attitude, and we shall be able to move on.
Okay. Back to you, Mr. Kaganizi. Looking at all this seems to be like a crash program, having students back to school. Do you think learners will benefit on a great scale?
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, I think learners must benefit because missing out education means incurring a very, very great cost on society. So it looks like a crash, but I wouldn't imagine it to be a crash. In the first place, COVID has been here for about 6 months now, over 6 months actually. Now, government has been planning, stakeholders have been planning, the parents have been planning. So I think some of the standard operating procedures that are in place that have in a way tried to protect society can as well be employed in schools to protect children, to protect teachers and other staff in that kind of situation. But the challenge now we have, why we may look at it as a crash, there are certain things which are difficult to change. For example, here in Kampala, it may be difficult to limit the interaction between the education providers and the beneficiaries in education institutions and the outer community. Now, we have cases that actually in Kampala, over 30% of infections are now in Kampala of COVID-19 now. And these children stay in their homes. Every morning they'll be trekking from homes to schools. Now, that's a challenge. It is a physical challenge which we must look at. How are we going to protect our children? That's why government is saying we should organize special transport for children from their homes.
And drivers must be checked as well.
And the drivers be checked and must be registered and so on. Now, the question is, are you going to limit the interaction between the children and their parents, between the children and the community? So those are some of the challenges. But one of the most important things is these standard operating procedures are being put in place. Do we have a mechanism as Ministry of Education? Do we have a mechanism as a community to actually monitor, ensure that those procedures are actually observed? One of the most important problems we have in Uganda is impunity. Some people think that because the authority is not looking at me, because police is not around, because I cannot be arrested for the offense I have committed, therefore I can do as I wish. So that's a challenge. In fact, one important aspect I want us to learn, recently when the president was about to address the nation on COVID-19, the former vice president, Dr. Specioza Wandirakazbi, was on TV, and she mentioned that COVID-19 has now changed from a government responsibility, from an authority responsibility to a personal and community responsibility. And the most important aspect we have to look at as education institutions and those responsible in education now is how are we prepared as a community? How are we preparing our teachers? How are teachers prepared to address these standard operating procedures? How are they going to implement them? Now, the most important question also is, are our teachers motivated? Because for me, I come from a trade union, from a teachers trade union, Uganda Liberal Teachers Union. Now, the question is, if the conditions of the teachers are not put to rest, are you expecting these procedures to be observed, to be followed, to be monitored? And are the inspectors of schools there? Are they facilitated? Are they working? Because even if we are talking of candidate classes, that one is not alone. Because if we fail on the candidate classes to manage these standard operating procedures, it means we are putting a bigger risk of more closure on the rest of the children who are supposed to access schools. So I think our concern here is we must look at that issue. In fact, my brother here mentioned something about the plight of the teachers. Because when you talk about 20 billion, which the president pledged and actually came in as an intervention to help the teachers who have actually lost out payments. They have lost out jobs. Some of them actually have not been paid since October 2019. Now the question is, that package has come in, but have the teachers benefited from that fund? We don't continue talking about how it is going to be managed, who is going to manage what, because the point is, and my brother has put it very clear here, that it is supposed to help those teachers, and these teachers are organized. So now, if, for example, let me tell you,
those are modalities we are going to swim with.
Now, one of the most important questions now is, you are going to open schools, but these teachers, have you really taken care of them? And it is not about private school teachers. It is about teachers who teach both in government and private schools who are not paid by government. And if you look at our census actually in schools, you find that around 40% of the teaching staff in public institutions are paid directly by Board of Governors. They are not paid by government. And when we look at that package, it means it is going to private schools, where most teachers teach for privately, but also in public schools, where there are teachers who are offering public education, but they are not paid by government.
Mr. Mganizi, do you feel in one way or the other, government did not involve stakeholders before it took this decision?
That's very, very important, because if you are going to take a new policy, if you are going to take a new decision, a new dimension, you must make what we call stakeholder analysis. Have they analyzed it? Who are the stakeholders in all this process? Now, you hear about training. You hear about educating about the new procedures. Are the teachers trained? Are they educated?
Mr. Kaboyo here was trained.
If we teachers who are organized, yes, who are in trade unions, we are not brought on board. And somebody says we are bringing something new, but I imagine.
But you're in the trade union.
Exactly.
They were not consulted about
Not at all.
Mr. Kaboyo, how did you access the training you're talking about?
Oh, my God.
People like Mr. Kaganizi didn't have access to this kind
you
of
see,
and
Andrew,
other teachers around the nation.
Andrew and viewers, when we are speaking on a national TV like this, we have to be cautious, because
very much so.
Millions of people across the world are watching us. We should use facts. Some of our students are also watching us. I want to tell you that for the first time, we have had a protracted consultative process in terms of managing this COVID. There have been both Zoom and physical meetings held at the Ministry of Education and Sports. I know that UNATU as a union has been there. I know that Uganda Private Teachers Union has been there. I know that the Coalition of Uganda Private School Teachers Association has been there. I know for sure that it is on record that yes, we have unions, but they are not so much organized. They need a lot of skilling, retooling to be to that level. And because of that, also when we are doing consultation, you cannot consult a crowd. But if you have UJCC, Uganda Episcopal Conference, a representation, a sample, we feel that the Uganda Private Teachers Union or UNATU could easily pass on this information, or you have the information gotten from other media channels. But on consultation, I want to tell you, it has been done. Not that I have participated, but because I read and I try to follow up. Then
so what are you trying to allude to? That Mr. Kaganizi and the trade union where he subscribes to, they were not, why weren't they invited for these kind of meetings?
Now, like
is it because they're not organized?
Let me tell you, are you aware that his chairman general?
Yes.
Are you aware that his general secretary
of the
Liberal Teachers Union will be with us in State House today? Isn't that a fact?
It's a fact.
Now, what more consultation do you call that? Because it's not everybody that will be for this meeting. But if his general secretary is ready to participate in that meeting, it means that if you are participating, you cannot be at every level. And for me, I would think that being in that strategic meeting, because this is what nails puts the last nail, to me that is good enough. But we should be celebrating our efforts also, that if, for instance, there are plans, processes, and events that are happening and you have participated, you also disseminate to your quarters. Like if I'm from the federation and there is new information, we try to link up with our contacts across the country. Sometimes I hold meetings in the countryside to disseminate this, because we cannot have officers do our job. In our groups, we have to be very organized. And this also brings me to the challenge we have in terms of private school teacher associations. That is the sector that needs, I think, a savior to come. And the savior to come is to agree that they first have to accept that, yes, disorganization exists. And if the disorganization was not there, the president's grant would have found a home where to put that money. But now money came and landed into the neighbor's purse. And you will just peep at the neighbor when he's peeping. But now, for us as leaders, we are committed to organizing
what are
teachers.
the leaders doing to harmonize the intrigue that is in the federations? And what could be the pushing factors for this? Is it the long-standing issues of SACCO money and funds that have not reached the beneficiaries on the ground? Three
issues. That COVID has brought a proliferation of many teacher associations, which is good. They have woken up. Two, I've attended meetings where teachers castigate directors as monsters, bad ones, those ones, we don't need them. But you cannot be without. So directors and teachers must live in harmony. Three, that there are a number of our colleagues across board, could be teachers or directors, that are oblivious of government policy, that do not even know what should be done. So as federation, as Liberal Teachers Union, as other associations, we should be focused on education, sensitization, communication, to ensure that we understand what we are doing by reaching out. And when we reach out, we shouldn't use our offices maybe as comfort zones. We have to do work. We have to go an extra mile to ensure that the teacher who is listening to us is reached. And I know that programs like this are the beginning for reaching out.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Mr. Kaboyo there, what more can be done to schools that did not get the government funding or the government support with regards to COVID-19 while they're reopening? What support can be given from these kind of federations or unions that they can be in position to meet these standards irregardless?
I want to speak to the Federation of Non-State Education Institutions, for which I belong, that we are in talks with friends to ensure that as schools open, even if we are to provide them 5 liters of sanitizer, or giving a training to the personnel that are going to detect COVID, will be good enough for us to sow the first seed. Secondly, we are also putting it to the government that as it looks at stimulus packages for schools, it should be the same for private schools. But again, the worry is that in this COVID, much as we have the SOPs, there are some public schools that are badly off. And you ask, how practical will this be?
Thank you.
So the practicability of this is to bring communities together, to have local governments. And for us, you ask, what are we going to do? We are going to lobby. We are going to fundraise. We are going to discuss with colleagues to see that whatever comes out is shared. Physically, but also in terms of knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Kaganizi, the Parliament on Wednesday spent much of the debating on the floor discussing a dead year. What is the rush? Can't we just call it off a dead year and we proceed to the next year and then we can start afresh? It seems to be like countrymen are stuck on the calendar that we start in Feb and we proceed. What's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, the dead year, I think it is very necessary, especially in terms of protecting lives, protecting the health of Ugandans, protecting the health of our children, and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, what is the alternative for community survival without education. That's the challenge. Parliament may debate, may look at all the dangers that we are going into as we reopen the schools. But the question is there any proposed alternative to substitute for non-existence of education? So I think that one is very, very important. In some developed countries, in some countries actually, education has been going on even when there has been a lockdown. The challenge is that our ICT is not developed. We cannot have education online. But we must think, that's why I said it is important to involve the stakeholders. We must think beyond. Because actually some educationists, they say this is the new norm. How are we coping with the new norm? It means we need a lot of innovation. That's why we talk about liberal. We need to liberalize even our minds. So the question is, we need to look at other alternatives, because even when the candidates are now going to school, supposing they go, the question is, what are we doing to the rest of the children who are remaining in homes? Most of the parents are here, you are not at home. You don't know what is happening to your child, who is 5 years, who is 7 years, and so on and so forth. What kind of interaction is going on in homes? We have reports here as unions and teachers that a number of our girls are married off completely. Many of them are pregnant and so on. The rate of HIV infection is going high, especially among the adolescents. Now, the question is, what alternatives are we giving? That's one. Two, of course, some of the, we need to think around, because Parliament also may have issues, because life is important. Because if you are not alive, then you cannot think about these policies. But now the question is, Parliament has been operating since the lockdown. They have never been closed. How have they survived?
They work in shifts.
So yeah, they work in shifts and so on. But the question also is very, very important for our schools. Supposing we open, do we have that capability? Do we have that will? Do we have that initiative within ourselves to say that we are living in the new norm? Let us change our ways and habits of living. But the dead year is actually going for disaster, and more disaster is likely to happen when we are living in a society without education. So as leaders in these organizations, and teachers and parents and government and other stakeholders and directors of schools and so on, we need to look at what other alternatives are we putting in place, so that, because we need to be very, very innovative. There is training in online education. That one we have to look to, because as we open...
But you see, earlier on you alluded, you say the online cannot cover the bigger grid of this nation. Mr.
Yeah,
Kahoyo,
of course we don't have infrastructure.
What's your take on a dead year? What's the rush? Can we just call it a dead year and we just move on?
In fact, I don't want to hear that statement.
Okay.
Whoever is making it must...
Because that's what MPs were alluding for. They were like, can't we just call this a dead year and we proceed? The ministry cannot come out and
just
say
don't want to hear that. And in Kampala, they say these days, why? Because when you talk about death, it is a total loss.
True.
So the talk about death was closed by the president when he opened.
Yeah.
And to that level, I request that the discussion on a dead year ends there, and this should be the last time we are using it. Because every country that prides in itself must have a very well-nurtured human resource. And the human resource we are talking about, these are the people that you have to invest in. So the danger of keeping those who should be in school for over 8 months has dire ramifications that you cannot undo in third world countries, sub-Saharan Africa. So what should we do is to comply to what is provided and be creative. By the way, who told you that for every student in a class to learn, there must be a teacher in front? Students can be in the room instructed to do their work independently, minimizing interaction. And those who are saying dead year should know that 2 institutions, the classroom and the barracks, that's where instructions are followed to the latter. Meaning that if these students are brought to school, boarders, there shall be total management. But also schools now should be vigilant enough. You see, yesterday the Minister of Education issued out a calendar.
Yeah.
But I would want schools with the ministry to go an extra mile and study the individual school timetables. How are they timetabling the time? Are we going full blast academics, biology, chemistry, physics in week 1? No. Week 1 should be therapeutic. You give therapy to these students that you are going to talk to them, engage them, address their psychosocial needs of how they are going to cope. Some are going to come when they are so hyperactive. Some of them are going to come that they have spent a lot of time, they have never seen this, they want to hug, they want to say hi, they want to run around. And the guideline is saying no physical interaction. Cultures that hug, you greet by hugging, even almost staggering.
Oh, yeah.
That should not be the case. Those teachers who are listening to us have to be vigilant. If not, the public should know that as we speak, Mulago Hospital is full, Nambole is full. Maybe the Minister of Health and Minister of Education should capture some of those images and show to the public.
To bring them to speed.
To bring them to speed and say, have you seen what is happening? But also training. I think to us, people have not yet understood the danger of COVID, because this is Uganda, Andrew. We shall be there. Yes, so we have to style up.
Well, that's a conversation we've had. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We've had Mr. Patrick Kaboy, who comes from the non-state education institutions. That is where he is the Secretary General there. And of course, we have had Mr. Mutesa Sidakaganiz, the Secretary General of the Liberal Science Teachers Union. Mr. Kaboyo comes from is the National Secretary of the Federation of Non-State Educational Institutions. This is a conversation we've been discussing about this. And remember, this is coming on the heels as we are hoping to commemorate the National Teachers' Day. That is on October the 5th. Now, today, we're having a conversation more about the teacher policy that will streamline, I think, more of these guidelines and studies on how best we're going to do this. We'll take a break and we'll be back shortly. It's Morning at NTV.